Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to be walking through the feedback loops in the non-gravid female reproductive system. This is basically how the brain and ovaries communicate every single month in someone who isn't pregnant. I like to think of this system as a well-timed conversation between the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and ovaries. They're all working together to coordinate hormones, prepare the body for a potential pregnancy, and then reset if that doesn't happen. The menstrual cycle isn't about bleeding once a month, it's actually a hormonal miracle. Hormones rise and fall at exact moments, triggering changes in the ovary and uterus, and it happens on repeat cycle after cycle unless pregnancy occurs. We'll see negative feedback loops and positive feedback loops throughout. What's interesting about the female reproductive system is that it's one of the only systems in the body that uses positive feedback in a huge way to trigger ovulation. So I'll be breaking down the cycle into its four phases: the menstrual cycle, the menstrual phase, follicular phase, ovulation, and then luteal phase. Each phase has different hormonal feedback loops, different ovarian structures, and different goals, all lasting about 21 to 35 days overall on average. So let's get into it. The menstrual phase is what is going to be starting the menstrual cycle. It typically extends from days 1 to 5, but it can vary greatly from person to person and sometimes month to month, depending on numerous factors that we'll talk about later. Day 1 is the first day of bleeding and marks the start of a brand new cycle. Menstruation happens because progesterone and estrogen levels drop off sharply at the end of the previous cycle after the corpus luteum breaks down. This drop removes the negative feedback on the hypothalamus and pituitary. So at this point, low estrogen and progesterone tell the hypothalamus to release gonadotropin releasing hormone, also known as GnRH. As GnRH pulses increase, follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, begins to rise. FSH works to recruit the follicles for the next phase, and even though menstruation is happening, the ovary is already gearing up for ovulation weeks from now. The body's clearing out old uterine lining and simultaneously sending the first hormonal signals to grow a new follicle. So next, the follicular phase begins. This phase actually overlaps with menstruation at the start, but it continues until ovulation. So it begins on day 1 with the menstrual phase and extends through day 13 on average. During this time, FSH stimulates a group of follicles in the ovary, but eventually only one follicle is going to become dominant. This dominant follicle secretes more and more estrogen as it matures. Early in the follicular phase, estrogen still engages in negative feedback. This means it pulls back on producing FSH to make sure only one follicle becomes dominant. But here's where things get a little more interesting. An estrogen as estrogen from that dominant follicle continues to rise and stay high for a longer period, the feedback loop switches from negative feedback to positive feedback. This tells us that the body's gearing up for ovulation. Sustained high estrogen sends a message to the hypothalamus, and it basically says, we've got a mature egg ready, it's time to release it. In the wake of this, the brain dramatically increases GnRH pulses, which triggers the pituitary to release a huge spike in the luteinizing hormone, also known as LH, and cause a smaller rise in FSH. The positive feedback system is very rare in the body, and it's absolutely essential for ovulation. It's pretty cool that the female body can work in perfect harmony to maintain all of these loops. Ovulation is the next step in the menstrual cycle. Ovulation occurs typically around day 14, again, if we're assuming that this is a 28-day cycle. This is the shortest phase, but it's arguably the most crucial. The LH surge that we just talked about in the follicular phase is what causes the ovarian follicle to rupture and release the oocyte. Estrogen at this point is very high, LH is dramatically high, and progesterone begins to rise just slightly. Ovulation is the result of a unique occurrence of high estrogen, causing a positive feedback loop. This loop produces a surge in the luteinizing hormone, allowing the egg to release. Once the egg is released, the ruptured follicle then transforms into the corpus luteum, which sets us up for the luteal phase if pregnancy does not occur. The most important thing to note here is that ovulation is driven by positive feedback, one of the only major positive feedback systems in the human body. This means that instead of hormones keeping each other in check and balancing them out like they normally do, one hormone actually triggers more and more of itself, creating a snowball effect. In this case, the rising of estrogen from the dominant follicle eventually tells the hypothalamus to release more hormones, not suppress them, specifically luteinizing hormone. After ovulation occurs, the luteal phase then begins. This is typically extending from day 15 to 28 or 15 to the end of the cycle. The corpus luteum now gives off high progesterone and moderate amounts of estrogen. Progesterone is the star of the luteal phase. It stabilizes and thickens the uterine lining to prepare for potential implantation. Not only this, it creates a very, very strong negative feedback loop on the hypothalamus and pituitary. High progesterone and estrogen end up suppressing GnRH, resulting in very, very low LH and FSH. The female body does this because it does not want to recruit another follicle right now. It's kind of in like a wait and see mode to determine if implantation is going to occur. If pregnancy or implantation does not occur, the corpus luteum degenerates around day 28. When that happens, progesterone and estrogen are going to fall, and that drop triggers menstruation, restarting the entire cycle and bringing it back to day 1 in the menstrual phase. The main idea here is that high progesterone gives strong negative feedback to result in LH and FSH suppression. As if the menstrual cycle were nothing short of a miracle, even more interesting byproducts can occur. For example, studies have shown that voice changes can occur throughout the cycle. Believe it or not, the menstrual cycle can actually influence the sound of a woman's voice. This is because estrogen and progesterone both affect the tissues of the larynx and the vocal cords. In the days leading up to ovulation, when estrogen peaks, the voice can sound clearer. After ovulation, when progesterone rises, the voice may feel a little rougher or a little more fatigued, something singers and performers are extremely aware of. It's a subtle change, but it's a great example of how hormones don't just affect the reproductive system, they actually affect the whole body. Additionally, physical or mental stress can impact a cycle and therefore impact feedback loops. Stress, no matter the kind, can absolutely impact the menstrual cycle. High stress can reduce GnRH pulses from the hypothalamus, which then lowers LH and FSH levels from the pituitary. Without those signals, the ovary might delay or skip ovulation, and that can make cycles longer, lighter, or in some cases, stop temporarily. This is the body's way of saying now is not the ideal time for pregnancy, so let's conserve energy. It's a powerful reminder that reproduction is deeply tied to overall well being and that our nervous system and endocrine system are always in communication with each other. Finally, hormonal birth control works by taking advantage of the feedback loops we just discussed. Hormonal birth control works because it taps directly into the body's natural feedback systems. By providing steady levels of estrogen and or progesterone, birth control can actually trick the brain into thinking ovulation has actually already happened. That is going to prevent the big estrogen peak and prevent the LH surge, which means that the ovary never releases an egg. So instead of forcing the body to do something unnatural, hormonal contraception basically uses the body's own hormone logic to keep ovulation turned off. The female body is so interesting and has such an intricately woven web to keep all these processes in line all the time. As always, here are my references, and that's the summary of the negative feedback loops of the non-gravid menstrual cycle. I hope walking through that helped connect some dots for you and gave you a clearer picture of just how intelligent and responsive the female reproductive system really is. Thanks for listening.